living English painter, perhaps the most influential English painter for 100 years. He rarely makes public statements about the art he practices, but 12 years ago he wrote these words: "I think that painting today is pure intuition and luck, and taking advantage of what happens when you splash the bits down." And he wrote about the same contemporary painter these words: "The brushstroke creates the form and does not merely fill it in." Francis, you wrote that both 12 years ago, as I said, and about a painter contemporary who you greatly admired, about Matthew Smith.
Yes.
But would you say that in those words, in fact you encapsulated, you said what you feel about most of the painters who are trying to paint now?
Well, I wouldn't say it about most of the painters who are trying to paint now, but about most of the painters that interest me. It's the only type of painting that interests me at all, because, for instance, the mystery of how fact can be made is an accident, because you can analyze the thing as far as you possibly can, but finally the mark that you make is something that you don't know whether it is going to make the image that you want to record, or whether it will, whether this fact that you are trying to record can only be made out of accident, because once you know how to make it,
or exactly what you're going to make,
yes, you make an illustration of the fact. Now, this is a very complex thing to talk about, but of course Matthew Smith to some extent was near that, and perhaps all the painting that in the last few hundred years that I've most admired has been made that way. If you look at the thing that Constable made of the leaping horse, the study for the leaping horse, this was made by continuous marks, which, if you analyze the marks, they were anti-illustrational, but they were marks which brought the facts more immediately onto the nervous system.
And do you think that this bringing of a fact towards the nervous system is the basic thing by which man can understand great art, rather than good art and art?
Well, Valery said something which was very interesting. He said that modern man, wants the sensation without the boredom of its conveyance. Now,
cat without the smile.
Or he said, in fact, the grin without the cat.
Yes.
But
the other way around. Exactly, the grin without the cat.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when I've forgotten what we're going to say now.
Well, you see, it's sort of talking really about what I wanted to get onto really was the central problem, which is if you allow that there are three main streams towards creating anything, whether it's literature or painting, there is basically what you can be called the subconscious, which is in a way to some extent a discovery of the last 70 years. There's then the imagination, which is something that has been endlessly, self-consciously known about for at least 500 years. And then there is, then there's technique. There's just those three. The subconscious.
The subconscious, you may say, was brought about by psychoanalysis, in fact by Freud.
Yes.
But of course it has always been one of the most important things in any kind of art. And at any rate, to stick to painting, the mystery of, shall we go back for a moment? For instance, abstract painting is a form of escaping the issue, because abstract painting can never, even at its very best, can be never more than lyrical, charming and decorative. It never finally unlocks, like great art can do, unlocks the valves of feeling by this attempt to record the fact. Well, now this is, you see, what any artist needs today is a profound technical imagination. It's a technique by which he can reset the trap in which this image that he wants to record can be trapped again.
The image he wants to record must come directly from his experience. That is to say, from his received experience, something that he himself has done, has felt, has seen.
I would say, you see, there are two things that you can record. You can record a very factual thing like a portrait of somebody, and you can also record your sensations about a lot of various things, but you have to, in the portrait, you have already your image there, which you want to find the way by which this thing can record it. And this is a very, very complex thing.
And this is done by a series of what you call accidental marks.
Well, you see, now, if you know how you can record it, you illustrate it. So the great recording of fact today can only be made through accident, and the painter himself, of course, you may say that in a sense it's an accident out of which he finally chooses the marks which he wants to leave.
But how...
And can remake the image.
Yes. How much control do you think he has over, if I talk rather paradoxically, how much control does he have over this accident?
I should say in the first place none. But then, of course, will, we don't know how far will. And the thing is that the more unrelated the mark is to what is called an illustration of the fact, the more deeply he can possibly not only illustrate the fact, but unlock all the areas of feeling which very great art has always done, because it's not only recorded a fact, but it has also unlocked all sorts of areas of sensation at the same time as it's recording. It's been doing both. It's been doing a double thing.
Exactly. But do you feel that because in the last 50 years, again, that this is not to do with the unlocking of the subconscious by Freud, but do you feel that because of all the mechanization of imagery, if you like to call it that, from photography, from advertisement, from in fact the whole world in which we live, where everything is in fact available, we have images thrust at us, which we have, I mean, nothing has to be remade as it did 100 years ago. Do you feel that in this way, that in fact most painters, however good their technique, however imaginative, have in fact not availed themselves of their purest form of their imagination?
Well, you can learn nothing now, because there's nothing to be learned, because everything is on the ground, everything is wide open for anything to happen. So this is, of course, why abstract art has come about. But if you want to make figuration, it's exactly the same thing.
It's always been the same and remains the same. Really.
Well, I don't know. I suppose it has always been the same, but it's become more acute now because, of course, on a superficial level, photography can take over from an ordinary, simple recording of appearance, you see.
Yeah,
but what is more difficult is how can you remake appearance? How can you bring this appearance, this thing that you long to trap, how can you bring it over directly onto the nervous system, more directly and more immediately than any illustration of it can ever do, or than any photograph can ever do?
And do you think that this battle, which is really what it is, isn't it?
It is a battle.
Perpetual battle, not with technique. As I understand you, you're saying that really, in fact, the technique you're taken as understood.
No, I'm not taking it as understood, because you see, the technique has to be reinvented. Because, in fact, you can't. The moment the technique is invented, it dissolves again. Because the moment it is known, it immediately takes on an illustrational appearance. So it has to be, the technique of recording has to be all the time remade. So it's like a continuous, it's like a continuous invention, really, to record a fact.
Do you think that there are young painters now who in fact have their control, they have both the technique and the imagination and the capacity to give in to the power of accident?
Well,
or do you think it was becoming more and more difficult for a young painter to operate in this way, or going to work, if you like?
It's going to become more and more difficult to do what used to be called figurative painting. It's going to be more and more difficult to paint a portrait.
Yes.
Because gradually the whole complexity of this thing, the game, what you may call the game of remaking this image, is going to become more and more complex because we will demand it in a more and more profound and it's difficult to say this, but sensational and evocative way of not only but you're remaking it by stuff which has which is a mystery in itself of how that this thing can illustrate,
Yes.
you know, to remake
Yes.
this fact that you're trying to record. One of the things I think that now, that for instance when galleries buy portraits of people, that they should put up beside them a kind of police record in photographs of the person and then the portrait beside them, and it would give a kind of idea of how this person looked in photography and how they had been remade in painting.
Is this almost like sort of allowing that the validity of photography in one sense is so strong that it has in fact almost remade the human face in the way that painting should be?
Well, the thing is that at one time people never... We look at life through photographs half the time and through the cinema.
Yes.
I mean, quite as well. So we are doubly assaulted by the image.
And you think this double assault should be formalized, in fact, by having the photograph
your
next to the
nervous
portrait?
system can't evade it, you see. It's
Yes.
there all around you. There's absolutely no way of evading. And of course this will become greater and greater. So the thing of an artist recording this thing in his medium is going to become more and more difficult and complex.
How much
to do?
Do you think that all this refers to other arts, particularly, say, to literature? I mean, do you see that the necessary experimentation, which as actually, when we were talking earlier, when you said which in a sense must be a failure, do you see that the experiments in literature, in a way, are more, well, intransigent, simply because words are very much more precise than the pure accidental stroke of the brush?
Well, I imagine that literature, I don't know enough about it, is in the same dilemma as painting, because all the arts, I think, are in the same dilemma. I mean, music is certainly in the same dilemma as painting. This is
But this precise dilemma, I mean, this precise dilemma of illustration, of the
not
avoidance
music,
of illustration.
Of course, but music has
No.
always been slightly an abstract art. But certainly in literature, it's a deep, deep dilemma, because between people having to cut up their things and shuffle it about and remake phrases and hoping that something more poignant and more exciting about reality will come out, and the people who are trying to record it directly, they are both lost and in a hopeless state. You see, one of the things is that, for instance, if you take literature, one of the great last human records that have been made was made by Proust.
Yes.
It was one of the last great records of human behavior that has been made. And since then, after that, of course, things are altered, and people have tried to find another way, and as time passes, and techniques and our way of seeing fact changes, so the technique has to be altered to re-find it and remake it again.
But do you think that with Proust that he discovered, or rather rediscovered, the golden rule, which is of concentration, of hibernation, in fact, which is what he did, of in fact the total conservation of himself so as to produce an art?
Well, that I don't know. I don't think so. I think it just happened that Proust was a very, very remarkable sensibility,
Yes.
but who struggled all his life, and gave up his whole life to try and make a system by which he could trap this fact of human behavior.
And the fact of human behavior, and what fact of human behavior do you see that he has revealed in the end?
Well, of course, it's on a very large canvas
Yes.
in Proust's case. It's very wide, and you could say that he has covered an enormous area
Yes.
of behavior, perhaps the widest area in some ways since Shakespeare.
Well, in a marvellous sense, one of the reasons he seems to have done this is, in a way, something tremendously simple, is that he's simply chosen an enormous social area. And this because he has such an imagination, that this can apply. I mean, he applies his social observation to his imaginative observation. He's used this enormous thing, rather in the way that Dickens did and that Shakespeare did, and that practically no one else has. But I wonder whether, when we're talking in these terms, whether there's any painter or a possibility for a painter to, in fact, produce in the way that, for instance, that Rembrandt and Velázquez have produced a huge image of the world. Whether there is a possibility for a painter to do that now.
Well, perhaps the painter isn't here at the moment, but the possibilities are so enormous that I think at any moment that somebody will come along and be able to do this thing on this very big scale. Because the possibilities are marvellous, because there's nothing so wonderful as when the stage is bare.
That's very true. Thank you, Francis Bacon, very much indeed.